Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for one more episode, the final episode, in fact, of this particular series of my Teodora Talks Tech overall series with the Native Millions Foundation. Thank you so much. If you're joining us through YouTube, joining us through Facebook, whichever one, feel free to say hello, to leave a comment, to let me know where you're joining us from, and also to let me know if you've seen any of the previous series as well. So the first series that I did was focused on digital wellness, a five-part series as well. The second one was focused on positive psychology and kind of 5 aspects of positive psychology, different types of positive psychology practices. And then with this one, the timing seemed really appropriate and really right to talk about self-care practices. And again, in a 5-part series, I've talked about some of what I think are the most crucial self-care tools are that we can all implement in our daily lives. And so with this final episode, I'm going to be addressing character strengths, which is actually another very well-researched aspect of positive psychology. And so if you're kind of more interested in positive psychology, what it is as a field, what are some of the kind of the other tools that it has to offer, I would definitely recommend that you check out my previous series on positive psychology. So thank you all again for slowly starting to join us now. If you watched my previous episode last week, which was on minding our thoughts and how we can use cognitive behavioral practices to change our thinking, I want to apologize for some of the technical glitches that I was experiencing, which I hopefully won't be experiencing this time. But we'll see how it goes. So again, please feel free to say hello. Let me know where you're joining from, and really anything else that you would like to share. Now, when it comes to our character strengths, there are a few different frameworks which you may be familiar with already, different frameworks that have been developed over the years. Given part of my background is in positive psychology, the one that I prefer to use is the one that comes from that particular field. And that was actually co-created by Dr. Martin Seligman, who's considered to be the father or one of the fathers of positive psychology. And if you watch my previous series on positive psychology, you know that this is really the kind of the defining question of the positive psychology field, or the defining question that really changed the field before positive psychology came in. And it is this question of what am I doing right that we want to be asking, as opposed to what am I doing wrong, which is oftentimes what we tend to ask because of something called the negativity bias that is kind of built into our brain and has developed over many tens of thousands of years. But what we used to ask in the field of psychology in particular, when we treat our clients and our patients, was what are they doing wrong, or what is wrong, or what is not working very well, what needs to be fixed and what needs to be repaired. So really what we were looking for was the mistakes and the glitches and the missteps. And then with the entrance of positive psychology and people such as Dr. Seligman, the question was kind of flipped on its head. And the foundational question was asked of, why do we need to keep asking and looking for what is wrong? Why don't we look at what people are doing right? And why don't we kind of delve deeper into that? And I think this is one of kind of the nicest quotes out there when it comes to this kind of question of doing right. And it says, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you. And this comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, which those of you who are either knowledgeable on the mindfulness field or practice mindfulness, you would have heard of Jon Kabat-Zinn. He is pretty much credited with introducing mindfulness-based approaches into the United States several decades ago. So his kind of approach to this whole question of rightness is really looking at that kind of most foundational element, which is the element of breath and the element of air. And there's something very something very calming and very balancing, I think, about that thought in itself. But I also love how this illustration kind of shows us that concept as well. And again, if you've been following me for a while here, you know that I'd like to use illustrations a lot when I talk about some of these concepts. And this one, I believe I did share already once before. This was created by the Awkward Yeti. And it's this juxtaposition between kind of knowing how to do things right and knowing how to do them wrong, and changing perspective. And so you see the brain here that is quite fed up and says, I hate snow. And then you see the heart, and the heart is making a snowman and says, you're just using it wrong. And so I love that contrast between doing things in a way that that doesn't really not just serve us, but serve us in that emotional sense, and looking for ways in which we can kind of transform our agency and transform the way in which we kind of act in the world. And I think talking about our strengths is one of the most wonderful ways, really, of doing that. So the way that I would encourage you to think about your character strengths, the series is on building your self-care toolbox. So in any case, everything that I've spoken about so far in this series is really meant to be a tool for you. But I think when it comes to this framework of character strengths that I'm going to be sharing with you now and talking to you about in a little bit more detail, a great way to look at it really is that each one of your strengths is a tool just on its own. And the framework that I'll be sharing with you consists of 24 character strengths, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about it in a minute. But this is just kind of a kind of setting up the scene and a way in which to look at character strengths. And I think this is really the best way to think about them as resources that are always there, that are always available, that are always there at your disposal, that you can reach into at different times of your life, different times of your day sometimes as well. And so, like I said, there's one particular framework that I want to share with you today, and this comes from the VIA Institute on Character. And this test has been taken by, I forget the exact number at this point, but millions of people around the world. And so it's been tested out a lot, really well researched. It was co-created by Dr. Martin Seligman. And this is a kind of a description or a definition of what the VA Institute on Character considers to be character strengths. So they're really the qualities that come most naturally to you. And like I said, there are 24 character strengths. So each individual possesses all of them, just to different degrees, giving each person really a unique character strengths profile. And when you know your strengths, you can improve your life and you can thrive. And research actually has revealed that people who use their strengths a lot, so who are a lot more kind of intentional and purposeful with their strengths, are 18 times more likely to be flourishing than those who do not use their strengths. And so this is a conceptualization that I really like, especially in light of that first question that I shared with you, or those first two questions rather that I shared with you, the what is wrong with me as opposed to what is right with me. I think this framework, again, shifts our focus and attention onto what, as it says here, what we already kind of naturally possess, or what naturally comes to us already. And the belief here really is, or the position of the VA Character Institute, is that each one of us possesses this whole constellation of 24 strengths. It's just that we use different strengths to different extents. And so we're better at some, or we're stronger with some of them than with other ones. But the wonderful thing about this is that there aren't really any wrong answers. There are no kind of weaknesses here. It's just an issue of challenges, perhaps, to use some of our weaker strengths a little bit more. And so I would encourage you to visit the VA Character Institute online. You can take this survey. There's an adult version and there's a youth version, or a children's version. Children need to be at least 11 years old, I believe, in order to take the youth version. And if you're not comfortable with your child taking it on their own, you can take it for them. But if you go to Untitled.org. You'll be able to take this survey free of charge. You're going to get your results, and you'll see that they'll be listed in order of strength. And the top 5 strengths are the ones when we do strengths coaching that we really like to focus on, and that we really like to help people become a lot more kind of aware and conscious of, and start using them in a much more intentional way in order to improve their psychological and their emotional well-being. The one kind of concept that I wanted to just to bring your attention to just for a couple of seconds is perhaps a slight detour, but maybe not so much, is this difference between thriving and surviving. I think it's very helpful to compare and contrast concepts like these, kind of like with the first set of questions as well, because they can really raise our awareness in terms of how are we functioning at the moment. And I think, especially given what is going on right now, this is just a very useful, very helpful question to ask, and to understand the difference between what it means to thrive and what it means to survive. And one of the first times that I heard this concept spoken about was a number of years ago now. It was Esther Perel who talked about this idea, and many of you may be familiar with her. She's probably the world's best known couples therapist, has done 2 incredible TED Talks. I would definitely encourage you look her up. But she is a child of Holocaust survivors. And so she will occasionally talk about this idea of thriving versus surviving, and how, as she was growing up in this community of Holocaust survivors, she started kind of asking herself that same question, and noticing what the difference actually looked like between those people who were just surviving post trauma, and the people who were actually able to thrive. And so, of course, what I'm talking about here is nothing close to that level of trauma. I'm talking about more on a kind of day-to-day basis in our daily lives. But I think that this contrast is still a really important one to be aware of, and to really think about: am I just kind of okay? Am I just sort of surviving? Or am I actually going beyond that? And am I actually able to thrive? Am I actually able to expand and to improve and to innovate on however small or large a level? And talking about our character strengths and kind of being more aware of them, really bringing more awareness to them, can absolutely help us be on this kind of side of thriving instead of just surviving. And so I wanted to share with you some of the benefits of knowing what your character strengths are, because I think a lot of us are aware of what we're good at. I'm sure every single one of us has some sense of that. So you may be wondering, why do I actually need to know what these are, and why do I need to kind of go through all this trouble and take the time to complete the survey to get my results, and so on. Like I said, this survey in particular, character strength as a whole field, it's very well researched at this point, and we know that there are very concrete and long-term benefits to not just knowing what our character strengths are, but then to also using them. And so the number one, of course, is mindful awareness. And I think that kind of says it all. It's really just being aware of what your character is like, and not just what your character is like, because we tend to kind of err on the side of negativity, and it's that negativity bias again that will make it very easy for us to say, well, these are the things that I don't know how to do, or these are the types of mistakes that I've made in the past. This is shifting the focus onto the strength. So what are the things that you are actually good at? And it brings mindful awareness to that. It also brings us a lot of confidence, because character strengths in themselves are perhaps not necessarily skills, but as soon as you apply them in the real world to your everyday life, they become skills. And of course, anytime that we are skillful at something, that we're good at something, our confidence immediately goes up. And it will help with your goal setting, it will help within the work context, it will help within the personal context in a lot of different ways. And so it will definitely bring confidence. It will definitely build up your resilience muscle. Resilience, and this is connected to the concept after that, resourcefulness. A lot of resilience is very closely connected to resourcefulness, and we don't talk about that often enough, I don't think. Being resilient is not simply something that you kind of try to push through and you use resilience in order to just kind of persevere. It is one part of it. But another aspect of it is really being aware of what your resources are, whether it's your inner resources, such as your character strengths, but also what are the outer resources? Who are the people to whom I could reach out, and what is the help that is available to me outside of myself? When it comes to character strengths, it's those inner resources that it helps us really be aware of so that we can practice resilience on a more kind of a long-term scale. And so one thing I always like to say about character strengths is that in the short term, they're incredibly beneficial to us because they can absolutely increase our positive affect. So they are a kind of short-term fix on the one hand, but they do also contribute to our ability to be resilient and to be resourceful. And so in that sense, they are kind of the gift that keeps on giving because they can really help us in the long term as well. Ultimately, and if you saw my positive psychology series, you know how important relationships are to our well-being and to our mental health. But knowing what our strengths are absolutely improves our relationships, because once you know what your strengths are, what are the kind of skills that you can apply on a day-to-day basis, it is a lot easier for you to manage your relationships, to navigate through your relationships, to perhaps help yourself and help other people when you experience any kind of difficulties within your relationships. But it can also potentially make it a lot easier to form new relationships as well. And so we really have this kind of wonderful and quite diverse kind of all around cloud of benefits when it comes to knowing what your character strengths are. And so here I wanted to share with you a little bit more detail about this framework. So coming from the VA Institute of Character, this is basically the way these strengths have been separated out. So we have these 6 categories. We have 24 strengths and we have 6 categories. And essentially we have endless possibilities in terms of the kind of the constellation of strengths that each and every person can have. So we have the categories of wisdom, we have courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. And within each one of those, we have a different number of specific strengths that belong to that category. Now, if you haven't completed the survey already, one thing I encourage you to do as you're looking at these strengths right now is just to kind of see which ones speak to you the most, which ones you kind of feel a connection with. I know that the very first time that I saw this layout of strengths before I had done my survey, there were definitely certain strengths that really kind of jumped off the screen for me or jumped off the page for me. And I thought to myself, these are the few that I know are definitely going to come up for me when I do my survey. And it turned out that they absolutely did. So just kind of as an example, like I said, once you get your results, you're going to have the list of all of these, so all 24 strengths, in order of strength. And like I said, those first 5 strengths are the ones that we really like to focus on and that we really like to work with when we do strengths-based and positive psychology-based coaching. So as an example, I just wanted to share with you what my top 5 strengths are. And at least 3 of these really jumped out at me even before I completed the survey. So my first strength comes from the transcendence section all the way on the right. So it's appreciation of beauty and excellence. And again, if you've heard me speak before about positive psychology, I mentioned this one a lot, and I give lots of examples of how I use it and how it just kind of comes up naturally for me in my life. If you've seen my TEDx talk, you would have heard me mention it as well. The second one is honesty. Honesty is in the courage section. Then I have love, I have fairness, and I have social intelligence. And so I have 2 that come from the humanity category, which of course didn't come as a surprise to me, given that I'm a psychologist and I'm a psychotherapist and I work with people, I work a lot with children. And so it made a lot of sense that these ones came out for me. Appreciation of beauty and excellence was a very kind of one for me because I have a huge appreciation for art in particular, nature as well, but art in particular. And so for me personally, the experience of learning what these strengths were just in itself improved my affect. Because it kind of confirmed to me something that I already knew, something that I was already aware of, and it gave me this very kind of a very kind of positive boost of hope is maybe the best word that I can use to describe it. That I'm kind of on the right track already by enjoying so many of these strengths on such a regular basis. Again, appreciation of beauty and excellence. I think that comes up for you in your report. That's an absolutely wonderful strength to have because you can use it in so many different ways and really on a daily basis and even multiple times during the day because you're able to notice, you're able to see and to detect the beauty everywhere around you. And I'll actually read to you how the VAA character strength, this one in particular, is actually defined. It's defined as noticing and appreciating beauty, excellence, and or skilled performance in various domains of life, from nature to art to mathematics to science to everyday experience, right? And so I think that strength in particular, even if it doesn't come up for you on your strengths profile, is really one that you can tap into. And I think especially, again, coming back to the current situation and to where we are now with this global pandemic, this really is a strength that we can use very quickly and very effectively as well, I think, to improve just our outlook on life and to improve our mood in the moment as well. And these are some of the questions that I wanted to share with you that you can use as a kind of journaling exercise if you'd like. It doesn't have to be a journaling exercise if you're not that big of a fan of journaling. It can be more of a mental activity, mental kind of thought exercise for you as well, whatever you prefer. But these are some of the questions that I think are a really good way to start with becoming a little bit more aware of what our strengths are and then thinking about the ways in which we can use them more intentionally. I think one of the most kind of powerful and foundational questions that I think, again, will go a really long way in terms of improving your affect is how has your path so far contributed to your constellation of strengths, meaning your path in life, your life so far. How has it kind of brought this constellation of strengths into place so that they look the way they look for you? Again, there's so many potentially infinite possibilities of how these strengths can come together in any individual. So for you, what has it been in your life that has brought you to this place? I can say for sure that in my case, and going back to the strengths and appreciation of beauty and excellence, my mom is somebody who spent pretty much all of her career working at a museum. And so for me, that definitely contributed a huge amount to that particular strength being very pronounced. In my case, we've also always had lots of art books in the home. And so one of the things I loved doing as a child was pulling those books out and reading about Leonardo da Vinci and Van Gogh and Monet and a bunch of other artists, looking at books on ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and so on. So that was where that one came to me in particular. Again, if you've been following me for a little bit, you probably know that I'm a third culture kid. I've lived in a lot of different places that are not my home country. And that's had a huge impact on my development of fairness, which is in that justice section, and also social intelligence, which is in the humanities section. So fairness is this ability to look at people and look at them as equals, regardless of where they're coming from and kind of what their detailed life stories and traits and behaviors and characteristics are. Living in a multicultural environment will definitely do that to you. I can say that for sure from personal experience. And then in the humanities section, social intelligence is definitely also very closely connected to that. And social intelligence is described as being aware not just of yourself and kind of having emotional intelligence for yourself, but having it for other people as well. And so if any parents are watching us, you have young children and you're wondering about how you can develop some of these strengths for them kind of going forward, I would say that when it comes to some of these strengths that fall into the humanity category and the justice category, being exposed to people of different backgrounds and different cultures, different religions, different traditions, will definitely develop and strengthen those two categories boundaries in particular. So that's that first question. The next one is, which of your top strengths, or top 5 strengths, do you use on the most regular basis? So taking some time to think about those. Again, if you go to the VAA website, you'll be able to see a more detailed description of each one of them so that you know specifically what they mean. But really kind of creating a kind of a map, almost, or a blueprint, or a kind of outline or a storyline of how you're using these strengths already, and thinking about your personal life, thinking about your professional life, thinking about your parenting if you're a parent, or your marriage if you're married, your relationships, the way you are with strangers, what your interests are, what you like to do in your pastime, all of these different aspects of your life, and then kind of locating or detecting your strengths in all of these different areas, and answering this question of which ones am I using already? Because again, if you think back to my first slide, that answers that question of what am I doing right already. And then we want to look at what are the top 5 strengths which we could use a little bit more of, perhaps, and which we're not using quite enough. I think that will probably emerge for you kind of naturally from answering that second question. And so starting to think a little bit in terms of, if this is my number 3 strength, this is a skill that I have. This is something that is already a resource there. It is a tool that is already there. I can pick it up a little bit more frequently, and I can use it a little bit more often. And then the final question is one that sometimes gets overlooked. I often do get asked that question by clients who complete the survey, and they say, what am I supposed to do with those strengths that fall right on the bottom of this list? What does that mean? Does it mean that I don't have the capacity for them at all, that I never use them? What am I supposed to do with them? Again, the framework approaches this from the perspective of you have all of these. It's just that some of them are maybe a little bit rustier. Some of these tools are perhaps a little bit rustier that haven't been picked up that often over the past month or months or year, perhaps. And so I think a really interesting and a fun and a helpful question to ask is, which of those bottom 5 strengths you feel that you would like to strengthen? One of the ones for me, it's not a bottom 5, and I would need to look at my report again to remind myself of what the very bottom 5 are. But within temperance, for example, self-regulation is a skill that is, or a strength that is, of course, very, very important. Again, especially in times like these. And for me, self-regulation falls somewhere in the middle. So it's a skill that I'm sometimes able to use. Sometimes it's a skill that just kind of ends up getting forgotten, or at times just become a little bit more overwhelming. And so I don't pick that one up quite as often. So for me, self-regulation is one that I've been very conscious and aware of ever since I first took this test, and I haven't actually retaken it in a while. So it'd be interesting to retake it and see if it's perhaps gone up a little bit more. But this is one that I at least really commit to trying to use a lot more frequently, a lot more often. Part of the reason being, of course, that self-regulation is something that I teach my clients, my child clients in particular, but adults as well. And so then, since honesty is one of my top strengths, it bothers me to feel any sense of being dishonest. And I'm trying to teach people something that I don't necessarily do or apply or use myself. And so self-regulation there is a really important for me. What you can do, by the way, is every once in a while, perhaps every year or a couple of years, you can retake the survey. And you probably won't get exactly the same results in a row. I doubt that you will, but it's interesting to see how our strengths change as we move through time and we move through different life experiences as well. So these are some of the questions that I want to offer you as a kind of starting point and as a kind of beginner's exercise to becoming a little bit more familiar with what your strengths are and really switching on your awareness to them and to using them as you move forward. And so with that pretty much brings us to the end of this series on self-care and the self-care toolbox. So I just wanted to quickly give you a recap of what the 5 episodes were in this series. Again, if you haven't seen them, I encourage you to go back and to find those videos. The easiest place will probably be on the Native Millions YouTube channel. In the first episode, I talked about emotions and emotional intelligence, and what are some of the ways in which we can really tend to our emotions. I think this is important on the best of days. It is incredibly important while we're all going through the many different types of difficulties and levels of difficulty that we're all going through right now. The second one, of course, as you know, is one of my big passions in work, which is digital wellness. So in the second episode, I was talking about digital entanglement and how we can begin to digitally detangle for the sake of our mental and emotional well-being. The third episode, I think, is a really, really important one because this topic is incredibly important. And so I was talking about practicing self-compassion. And during that episode as well, I actually went through what's called a self-compassion break. It's an exercise that comes out of the field of research on self-compassion. So I encourage you to look back at that one and to watch that if you would like to go through one of these guided activities. In the previous episode, I talked about our thoughts and what a huge impact what we think has on what we feel, and then, of course, on how we behave. And so I shared some kind of tips and tools and approaches from the field of cognitive behavioral theory and cognitive behavioral therapy that we can use to become more aware of our thoughts. Number one, as you're probably noticing, there's a trend here. Awareness is always step number one. So minding our thoughts, understanding what we're thinking, being able to pick up some of those very, very short, very quick, often negative thoughts that we call automatic thoughts. And then also what we want to do with them once we are more aware of what they are. I also shared a whole list of what we call cognitive distortions. So I would really encourage you to go back and look at that one as well. That list of cognitive distortions is also a very interesting activity to do on a regular basis, to once we're able to kind of pick out our thoughts to see where they fit within that list of cognitive distortions. That can also raise our awareness in a really, really helpful way and really help us identify where our thoughts are really being very unhelpful. We need our thoughts to be as helpful as possible right now. And then for this final one, we were talking about using our strengths. Again, turning on our awareness to what are the strengths that we already have inside. And then some of the 4 questions that I shared with you before, which will kind of get you started in terms of being more aware of your strengths, for one, but then also starting to use your strengths a little bit more as well. And so this is some of the information that you can use in order to get in touch both with me and with the Made of Millions organization as well. So please feel free to reach out. If there are any other resources that you would like, if there are any questions that you perhaps have as well, I encourage you to get in touch either with, again, the Made of Millions Foundation or myself. I've shared some of my social media handles there with you. Those are probably the best places to follow me, to know what other kind of events and webinars and other kind of virtual gatherings, if you will, I will be a part of. I want to mention finally, kind of as I wrap up, in case you are going through any kind of struggle with your thoughts, with your emotions, with your behavior, if there's anything you're finding particularly overwhelming right now, at the very least, to speak to somebody who's very close to you, somebody who you trust, whether you have a sibling, other family member, a friend, a colleague, a mentor. And then, of course, if you feel that that's not enough, that you need some additional help, especially if you're feeling especially unwell during this time, so please reach out to a mental health professional. It's incredibly important that we take care of ourselves right now. Like I said before, one aspect of taking care of ourselves is knowing what some of these resources are, so that we can self-help. But that will only get us so far. And there are absolutely times in which we have to reach out to somebody outside of ourselves. We have to reach out to either friends or family, or we need to reach out to trained professionals to help us as well. There's absolutely no shame in that. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for being here today. If you've followed me through the previous 2 series as well, thank you so much for doing that. If you would like to watch any of them again, please feel free to head over to the Made of Millions YouTube channel or to the Facebook page, and you'll be able to find all the other videos there. So thank you so much, and I hope I'll see you again soon. Have a great day.